Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for the ones on the east coast of the USA. Welcome to the fifth live session. This is also the last one of the ecological dimension. So it's great to have you all online. Let's get going then with the slideshow, and then we can have quite a bit of question and answers towards the end. So in the fifth module, which is green building and retrofitting, it pretty much starts to pull in information from the second module, which is your wastewater treatment and sanitation, urban food systems, renewable energy systems, and it brings it all together in the built environment. And our built environment is huge. It occupies a big component of the ecological footprint. And we need to apply ourselves with green building technologies, but also retrofitting of the existing built environment stock. So those are some of the key background about this module. And then the specific learnings to come out of this would be, trying to understand how we can apply whole systems thinking for the built environment, looking at various materials that we can use and how we can retrofit, and then looking at quite a few case studies. But onto the context for green building and retrofitting. So according to the Global Footprint Network, this is their statement there: the global effort for sustainability will be won or lost in the world's cities, where 70 to 80% of the world's population is expected to live by 2050. And to corroborate that, here's another independent source from Wikipedia, where they've mapped the urban and rural growth patterns up to existing and then projected forward to 2050. So we're seeing this massive population increase, but also a massive shift of folk from the rural to the urban components, especially in the third world, in Africa, South America, and to some extent Southeast Asia. In fact, even China, up until probably 40 years ago, they were predominantly a rural population, and 40 to 45% of the Chinese population is now urbanized. So there's been a massive shift. Can you imagine 1 billion people and 40% of that moving to new cities, and the impact that has on the ecological footprint? And here's another interesting statement about urban areas and cities. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers in the UK, they say 85% of global GDP was generated in cities. So they also mention the huge growth in the urbanization in Africa and Asia. And then some of the challenges with this, if we just look at the ecological footprint of Tokyo, for example, it turns out to be almost 3 times the land area of Japan as a whole. I mean, just dwell on that. Tokyo, with its, I think it's got about 36 million people. Its ecological footprint is 3 times that of the whole of Japan. Meanwhile, the ecological footprint of London is about 120 times the area of the city itself. And that adds up to almost the entire UK. And what this creates, apart from massive consumption, is this urban heat island effect, where over cities there's a considerable increase in average temperatures, sometimes 4 to 5, 6 degrees, and all the more reason to focus on trying to green our cities and especially urban growth. And then the rationale for this, if we look at just the sheer statistics, the global average impact of the built environment and its operational uses is estimated to use 18% of the planet's use of fresh water, 25% of the wood consumed, 40% of fossil fuels, and 27% of energy generated. So just by adopting sustainability criteria for the built environment, we start to make a significant impact to contribute towards climate change mitigation and adaptation. And Jacqueline posted on the discussion forum some links where they estimate that up to 40% of all material resources on the planet go into housing, and that's a built environment. So that's quite significant. So this gives us the underlying reason to do something significant to green our cities. And applying a whole systems thinking approach, from your course book, we need to get our headspace right. So most of the challenges in the built environment, we operate in silos. We have to adopt a collaborative design approach. This happens in our headspaces and our heart spaces too. So it's a collaborative approach between project managers, engineers, architects, social scientists, and so forth, instead of working in a silo mentality and you don't integrate your various ideas. Related to that, we do need very strong policy and meaningful strategies to mitigate climate change. And it's like a three-legged bar stool to support each other. One is creating an enabling environment. So this is also forms of legislation and policies and regulation which encourage consumers and developers to go green. So by having the legislation then in place, we create an enabling environment. The other leg of the bar stool is adaptation. So now this means local actions that minimize or prevent the negative impacts of climate change. That's adaptation. So that, in combination with the enabling environment, enables us to develop climate resilient development. Whereas the other leg, the third leg, the mitigation actions, these are the larger, broader global actions that reduce the emissions that contribute to climate change. So now that encourages the shift to a low carbon development. The two together, mitigation and adaptation, we start climate proofing our environment, and overall we can achieve a climate compatible development. So we need this type of interlocking policies and strategies to support our urban greening initiatives. And on the more practical level, so now this gives us the heart space at the top, the collaborative thinking. The policy and strategies is more the mind, the head space, how we get that right. But on a technical aspect, we look at it at two levels. 3D means three-dimensional, because most buildings are three-dimensional. And here we apply the closed loop or cyclical systems in new build and retrofit. So an open linear system is basically a building where everything flows in and everything flows out. Just imagine your toilet. You flush and away it goes. It's a linear system. Whereas a closed cyclical system, we draw in the energies that the building uses and we recycle as much as possible. So that's a principle we need to get correct up front. That's a three-dimensional space, the vertical space. But on a horizontal space, 2D, two-dimensional, we need to look at decentralized and integrated infrastructure, utilities, and services. So traditionally, we have centralized systems. Most cities, most energy systems started off from a decentralized basis. They have been decentralizing over the last couple of years because it's been understood that a decentralized system is more resilient. But an even better and more resilient system is a distributed system, which relies on multiple small networks that cooperate with each other. And these are self-forming, a lot of them. It's like the neural network of the internet. So think of it in the vertical space, three-dimensional, and what can we do on the two-dimensional in the spatial realm? Because cities sprawl outwards, that's a two-dimensional, and the buildings occupy a vertical space, three-dimensional. Let's expand the three-dimensional and two-dimensional thinking in the next couple of slides. So at a three-dimensional level, we start drilling down on sustainable building design strategies, or green design strategies, as we can call them. So in orange, we have those categories of activities called conservation strategies. And here it's all about insulating a window, insulating walls, windows, using low energy, low embodied energy materials, tight construction and ventilation, and allowing natural light in. So now, in other words, creating a watertight building, because you know that in wintertime, you lose significant heat just through any cracks and openings in a building. So these are conservation strategies. On the right-hand side, we see bioclimatic strategies in green, and these entail the sensitive site design, looking at solar aspects of buildings, green roofs for insulation, cooling and aesthetics, natural ventilation, and shading with plants. So now we're bringing our zone 1 and our permaculture right into the interface with buildings. In the brown component called waste management, we covered a lot of this in module 2. So this is composting for organic waste. We can use vermiculture. We've got natural wastewater treatment and recycling. There's a bit of sludge that comes out of that through the anaerobic processes. That goes back into composting. And then waste management, rainwater harvesting falls under this as well, because we need to recycle rainwater as much as possible, and also our grey water. Then in the pinkish light red, we've got energy strategies. So here's looking at all sorts of renewable energy generation that a building can do. And we covered this in the module 4. And it's basically looking at air source heat pumps, solar thermal for hot water, geothermal for heating and cooling, and then local energy using biomass, photovoltaic, centralized heat plants, and micro hydro. And then also importantly, social strategies. How can we design buildings for a sense of place? So here we need to design to enable personal fulfillment and social capital. We design buildings for a user interface and an architectural design for the soul. And also communications we need to look into quite carefully. I know there's 5G around, which is quite controversial, but still we need to think of other means of communicating in this form of green building design. Then moving on to, before we go on to two-dimensional strategies, just one slide to depict some really nice natural materials that we can use. Starting at the bottom, we've got a nice cob house with a wooden roof. It's got its feet that come out of the ground, so-called the foundations. You can see those are made of stone. So when it rains, the splashback from the rainfall doesn't stand that much of a chance of impacting on the walls, which would erode, which is cob. You've got a very big roof overhang, and also the plinth around the edges is a stone plinth, fairly high up, that can mitigate any erosion off the cob wall. Then in the center, we've got straw, very popular building and natural building material, stone masonry, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, look at all the different colored sand that can come out of a site in close proximity to a building site. And these are all the colorants that you can use to paint the final rendering of a building with, instead of using chemical paints. And then some nice natural material building out of bamboo and moving upwards. This is called a reciprocal roof structure, wherein there's an outer ring beam that locks in all the rafters, so the rafters don't fall down, and they all lock into place without needing a central column. And in the top is an example of a building that was built with sandbags and pretty much a reciprocal roof structure and a green roof. And then looking at the embodied energy of building material, on average, 35% is embodied carbon, and that's just in the construction of the raw material and presenting it fit for purpose to go into the assembly of a building project. In other words, it's the reconstruction of materials, the manufacturing, and the transportation to a building site. But the other 65% is what we could call emergy. And emergy is the operational carbon that is used during the lifetime of the maintenance for that particular building. Sorry, so emergy is a combined embodied carbon at the outset and the operational use, just to correct that. But so we have to design very carefully the materials that we select up front, because they've got a lifetime of operational usage, and also how we design the building. Let's look at some two-dimensional strategies now. So A Pattern Language is a book by Christopher Alexandre et al. And it's a fantastic book that outlines the pattern relationships in the built environment, right through from a city down to a hamlet, and even around at a micro detail around an urban park. Which way should the park benches face? Inwards to the park or outwards? And where do you put a lamppost? Next to a park bench or in between park benches? It goes right down to that level of detail. And often town planners, they're not aware of this pattern language that we need to be mindful of. And as an example, here's on the right-hand side of pattern language is two housing layouts. And this is just theoretical, but the one on the left is a conventional greenfield housing layout. Typical, it could be low-income housing, it could be high-income housing, it doesn't matter. It's urban sprawl, it's a picket fence with your detached house in the middle of a site. And it's completely disconnected to the natural environment. And the words at the bottom there, they're a bit small to read, but it leads to a sterile, unhealthy, unsafe monoculture built environment, which subdues community spirit and forms a barrier to the natural environment. The alternative, imagine having the same piece of land and thinking alternatively. And the big dilemma with architects and urban planners is, does form follow function, or does function determine form? So maybe it's both ways that they need to think about this. But here's the alternative layout. You have a central park around which you have your social amenities in orange, and around those would be the small apartments for the elderly, the young students, the single families, and then moving further outwards is the families with kids, and leading into allotment gardens, or just the agricultural small holdings attached to the end of the houses, and that merges into a food forest and the natural environment. So here we have all the permaculture zones in one layout. And the consequence is that we have a vibrant, diverse, and safe built environment, which promotes a sense of community, urban agriculture, and an appreciation of the natural environment. It's got the same housing yield, meaning the same number of houses in each layout. But which one would you like to live in? So just by applying the knowledge in the pattern language, you're better able to appreciate the subtleties between form and function in the built environment. So this sets the mindset for two-dimensional strategies. Spreading outwards then, integrating a sustainable drainage system, also known as SUDS. We covered this in module 2 somewhat. And then this concept of green urbanism. So just look at the sketch there at the bottom. It's a lovely illustration showing before and after how one can apply SUDS and green urbanism. So all we're doing is closing the loop. So instead of wasting all the water that comes out of these buildings, wastewater, rainwater, polluting it and then piping it into the river, basically paving, piping and polluting the water, what we're doing on the right-hand side as a retrofix or redesign is we're slowing down the water, we're spreading it and we're sinking it. And look how we collect the rainwater from the buildings. It goes into agriculture, it goes into ponds, wetland treatment projects, and very little of it goes back into the river. Most of it gets absorbed through the groundwater. So that's a far more pleasing way to apply two-dimensional green urbanism and integrate it within your sustainable urban drainage. And that will also reduce the urban heat island significantly. And then this is another two-dimensional strategy. This is the integrated infrastructure systems. So this is a development called Harlow North, which has been used extensively in the EDE trainings, which started around about 2006, at the time that this development was proposed. And I think at the time, everyone got quite excited how these new ideas could be applied at scale in a huge new urban development project. And over the years, I've looked for this project on Google Earth and online everywhere, and it seems to have fizzled out. So it's a project that hasn't happened yet, but it's been instrumental in providing a lot of the mind shift towards what we should be doing, even though it hasn't been built. And just a few days ago, I found this project on the internet. It's under Web Archives. So the developer of this project that didn't achieve development approval, he eventually uploaded all the documents online. And it makes a fascinating read for the amount of work they actually did. But sadly, it wasn't approved. And I think there were all strange political maneuvers as to why it didn't go ahead. But at the time, apparently there was only one underlying development protocol. And that was that the amount of water to be used in this development of about 5,000 new homes, there was only enough water to draw from the aquifers half of the daily amount required for water consumption. And the daily amount required by a British citizen at the time was about 90 liters per day. So the criteria was we can't deplete the aquifers by more than 45 liters per day per person, meaning that we would need to recycle and recharge the aquifers from all sorts of other interventions. And they came up with a plan. And it looks like a spider's diagram, but don't despair. The details of this are actually in your additional notes, and you can see section by section how the spider's diagram is basically built up. But it all starts off in the bottom left-hand corner with potable water. The water that is used is recycled, is cleaned. There's also permeable pavings that collect rainwater, clean it and make it fit for consumption. There's treated wastewater that goes back into the river systems. The anaerobic biomass from before the wetland treatment system that gets composted. Eventually that makes biogas. All the compost that comes out of this goes to farmers that can provide food that are bought by the workers and people living in this new development, and so on. So this is one big giant interrelated closed loop system. So as I said, even if it hasn't been built, I think it's inspired a lot of other developments to at least achieve some aspects of this in their integrated infrastructure systems. And I've put there the link, is it a development before its time? So if you just click on that link, you'll find that web archive and those wonderful documents that actually explain the vision of this project from about 2006, 2007 timeframe. So how do we start putting all this together? So there's a few case studies in your manual, but I don't want to dwell on the case studies here, rather the theoretical approach. So retrofitting suburbia is something that really grabbed me here. It's something that's achievable, it's to scale. Anyone can do this. And one of the pioneer behind this is Dave Holmgren, who wrote this book, Retro Suburbia. And you can see that Vimeo link as well, how people are achieving it street by street in several towns and cities in Australia. So how they're doing it is each plot is permaculturized so that we intensify the foodscape around each homestead. That draws on the natural and the built capital through retrofitting. And then the social and human capital is engaged through training, participation, local exchange. And this is how the social glue of the community starts growing. So it's a really nice way of taking transition right down to your very street. And then putting all this together in sustainable eco-home and eco-village designs. There were a couple of eco-home case studies that we provided, but how do we put these all together in an eco-village type environment? So one of the important basics there is getting the form and shape of the spatial arrangement correct. Because if we get the two-dimensional layout incorrect, or if it's not too sustainable, we'll be forever trying to retrofit to make it more sustainable. So think long and hard on the pattern of how everything is arranged. This is where you can apply your holistic permaculture design to get the right layout, or maybe even to retrofit an existing layout. And around these, we start building naturally for our homes, using renewable energy systems, using ecological water and sanitation, our local food production, and then creating the platform for our socioeconomic fabric, where we provide local employment opportunities, community facilities, and so on. And also a local currency that can help the exchange of local goods and services in this type of development, and avoid money being lost outside the system. So that's how we can integrate all these ideas in an eco-village setting. And then the last slide, the eco-villages have always been a laboratory for a broader movement called transition town movement. And this is where we can retrofit entire hamlets, towns, villages, districts, where we are, because we can't all move to an eco-village. So having said that, just to think forward now, there's a lot of ideas that probably came out of all five modules. And now's the time to start conceptualizing some of the potential case studies that you can undertake in teams of 3 to 4 students for the design studio. Now, the design studio is something that you do once you've completed all 4 dimensions. But I hope that there's been enough stimulation in these 5 modules that can come forward with some type of case study that you can propose that could be worked on in a team of students, which the design studio will start around about mid-July and run through to about the end of October. And what that does, we start integrating in an interdimensional design integration process, the 4 dimensions: ecological, economic, social, and worldview. And our experience has shown us that the ecological dimension delivers most of the ecological outputs, the more tangible things that you can visualize. The economic provides more of the overarching objectives for a particular project. The social starts generating a lot of ideas for the mission, the values, the institutional governance mechanisms, and so forth of a project, whilst the worldview start developing the overall vision for a project. They are all interrelated. But once you embark upon this design integration process, what comes out of this is a strategic framework for your particular case study that you can then take forward and pitch to potential investors, other eco-village people that you're trying to attract to your development. Basically, the next step towards achieving this project to make it realizable on the ground or to add value to an existing initiative. So that concludes our live session slideshow, and I think it's over to Gio if there's any questions that you want to, or things that you want to add, Gio.
Yeah, thank you, Ezio, and thank you for that presentation. It really brings all the material, the content of the course to the front, so we can kind of pinpoint some of the important parts of Module 5, the key learning that we can take away from Module 5. And I'm sure that some of the students might have some questions, but before that, I just want to take a minute to let everybody know about the ending of the course, which is scheduled to end this Friday, tomorrow. But I suspect that some of you may not have everything completed, and what I want to emphasize is the need to communicate with your facilitator, either Ezio or Cyan or Jacqueline, whoever your facilitator is, and let them know if you need a little extra time to complete your required assignments. And those are only the quizzes. They are multiple choice quizzes. As you know, you're required to pass them with a 70% passing grade. And also the reflections. So each module has 1 quiz and 1 reflection that we're asking you to complete in order to demonstrate that you have actually gone through the course and understand the material and apply it in your own life or your own environment in some way. That's what the reflections do. So in that vein, just to urge you to manage your time so that you don't drag it on too much longer. You may get another week of extension if you ask your facilitators, but after that, we expect the course to come to a closing so we can open the next dimension, which is the ecological dimension of design for sustainability. And if you haven't registered for the ecological dimension, the economic dimension, I urge you to go to our website and register for the economic dimension. You can still get a bit of a discount, and that will continue to round out your learning. Once you complete all 4 dimensions, then you are eligible to join our design studio, which starts in August this year. And Ezio will be facilitating the design projects again for the design studio. However, you cannot enter the design studio unless you have finished the 4 dimensions: the social, ecological, economic, and worldview. So that's why I'm bringing this up, so you still have a chance to register for those dimensions that you have not yet registered for. The last thing I want to say then is that tomorrow, when the course closes, or when it's scheduled to close, it'll still remain open for a while longer. But once you complete your quizzes and your reflections and the exit survey that we provide at the end of the course, once you have done that, the platform will recognize it, and you will be able then to download a certificate of completion, or rather it's a letter of acknowledgement for the ecological dimension, demonstrating that you have completed this dimension, that you have the learning, you have met the learning outcomes that we set out for this dimension, and you can use that in your CV or frame it in your office or anything that you want to use that letter of acknowledgement for. So that's a little bit of housekeeping for ending the course. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'd be glad to answer them for you, or you can ask your facilitators. They will also have this information for you. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say for now. And I'm really glad that these sessions have gone well. I've seen quite a few students coming to the sessions. I know it's difficult for everybody to join, but I'm very grateful for those of you who have contributed to making this course successful. And I hope that the learning has been substantial for you as well.
Gio, just a correction. I think the closing date for this dimension is about the 8th or 9th of March.
The closing?
The closing date is not tomorrow. I think it's the 8th or 9th of March, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, well, actually in my calendar, isn't this the last module, Ezio? I think it is, right?
Yeah, it is, but there's always about a week over for the students to finalize their submissions for module 5.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, what I meant to say is that we had projected that the 5 modules will go until tomorrow, and then of course there will be an extension or 2. So you're right, it's not going to close. People can still work, but we want to kind of draw it to an end in the next couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Are there any questions about this particular slideshow that people want to ask or just to comment on?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'd like to ask, I'm Cosima, sorry. This North Harlow development that was never realized that you mentioned, is there any way of finding it anywhere to have a look at it?
Yes, if you go to, we're going to upload this particular slide. Let me just go to the previous slide here. You'll be able to, where is it? Here, no, one more slide up. There it is. This blue hatching here is the web archive with more information on it. But I'll also post it in the discussion forum for everyone to look at.
Okay.
Which will make it a bit easier.
Brilliant. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And then if there's any way that you could push this development along or draw insights from it, then, you know, feel free to use that material in any which way you can. It's quite well constructed.
I'm sure it'll come in handy at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I had here's Eleanor, here's Ella. I had a question on the decentralized. It was one of the first slides. So there was centralized, then there was decentralized, and then there was this distributed network within an urban environment. What does that include? So if I'm looking, yes, that one on the bottom right. So if I take Paris, for example, what are we talking about? What is centralized or decentralized or distributed? So what are some examples?
I think the example centralized would be one power station delivering energy to a few substations and then a distribution network. This is in an energy context. A decentralized energy system would perhaps be not through several power stations, but maybe some renewable energy systems like a wind farm or a biomass boiler, or, I mean, for Paris it would be a bit different, but you might have outlying energy farms, solar, wind if it's applicable, biomass, and there would be more of these points rather than one central coal-fired power plant. So in having more power generating facilities, they would be linking up to a more decentralized system. But in turn, each decentralized node would also be interconnected. So if one goes down, it can draw support from another. So it creates a more resilient web. Whereas in a distributed system, imagine where you've got prosumers, where people have got a solar panel on their roof. They both consume energy and they produce energy. So you'll have a microgrid that can operate within particular maybe suburbs or particular blocks or even within a particular building. So that would give you an idea of an energy system that's centralized, decentralized, or distributed.
Thank you. And are there already like big cities that have something like this, or they're on the way to move towards a more distributed system?
I think hopefully they're on the way. They're thinking about this. They're certainly decentralized. A few. I know in Italy there's Enel Power that has changed the whole system of energy in Italy from a centralized to a decentralized system. The next leg now is to intensify the local microgrids that can tap into the decentralized model. But that's just for energy. If you look at other services, you'll probably find that they are more on a distributed basis. Maybe the way local exchange trading systems take place, that's more in a distributed network. You know, exchange of goods and services online without using money, for example. That would be an example of a distributed system.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
I would like to ask something. I'm Gökmen from Ankara, Turkey. Ankara is the second largest city of Turkey, about 5 million, more than 5 million people in the city. So it's a crowded city. So our initiative, Güneşköy, is about 60 kilometers from the city. We are in the rural area and trying to make a connection or reconnection, rural and urban. But there is really very large effort to put the city center, high-rise buildings and very inefficient buildings. The surfaces are covered with glass, no insulation, I think, or very, very poor insulation. So it's going in a different direction. Now, I really wonder how we can change this trend, including the vicinity of the city. For instance, we can produce our own food around the city and feed the city with the healthy food. There are lots of movements, grassroots movements in Turkey, but it will take some time. My question is about Gaia education. When we finish all the modules, of 4 modules, you mentioned about design studio at the end. I wonder what we can do. There are many students now with us here. There is an architect, and we have students from the city planning and engineering, social sciences, and all the people. So we want to start a movement in Turkey, in Ankara, maybe visit our town. So can you make any comment how we can proceed in the future and how this design studio help to reach this purpose? Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. What I'm going to try and find is a slideshow because this is quite an important question. You've got students there who are probably so interested to how they can take this further. But there's a slideshow. I'm just trying to see if I can find it, and then I'll share it with you, which is from the case studies that we've received over the years. And so this is I'm going to share this on the screen now. Let me share.
So Ezio, while you do that, maybe I can give Ali a couple of pointers about the design studio.
Yeah.
So Ali, when you get to the design studio, there will be, I'm not sure how many students, perhaps 25 or 30 students in the design studio. And what we want to do before the design studio, we will ask for you to submit a project that you would like to work on in the design studio. And we will select 5, 6, or 7 projects and then create small groups of people. We like to have between 3 and 5 in a group so that there is good working dynamics inside that group. More than that may be a little cumbersome, and fewer than that may be too much work for the few. So in the design studio, you will be set up in a group with 3 to 5 people who have finished all the 4 dimensions of the course, and you will work on a design project that has been submitted from inside the group. That's how we work the design studio. You can then take all that knowledge and all that information you learned in the design studio and apply it with your group locally. If you have engineers and architects and people that you can work with, you can serve as the facilitator to a local project that you design with that group. That's what I think the idea is behind the design studio. We obviously can't take projects for specific groups of people who have not taken the course, because what we want is for you to apply the learning in a real life design project. So I hope that answers a little bit of your questions, and Ezio will show you some of the design projects we've worked with.
Yeah, thanks, Gio. You hit the nail on the head there with the explanation about the design studio. And this is just a collage of the case studies that have come forward in recent years under basically 4 simple categories. Those case studies that are in the form of an educational center have got a blue border around them. Those that have an eco-village community type project is in green. An advocacy type project is in, beige. And then training is in yellow or orange. So these are the case studies from 2019. And the 2 bottom ones that you see there, Mgondeni Orphan Care Trust and Yelema in Guinea, and Ngwende, sorry, Orphan Trust, this was from Zimbabwe. And both projects engaged the community on site. So the student team managed to solicit a lot of information from the beneficiaries on the ground, and in turn divulged a lot of the planning ideas downwards as well. So those were 2 exceptional models. And then let's look at the next year, 2018. We had these 8 that came forward, all wonderful case studies from all over the planet. Hazel Tree in the UK did a development critique on a building project. 1 step at a time is how you can ease into an intentional community. Clean City is a very successful project that's been implemented in Nepal, dealing with solid waste. This is the Czech Eco-Village sustainability design. This is the first eco-village in the Czech Republic that's come forward. Gaia Ashram in Thailand. Then the previous year we had 4. We didn't have many students that year, but 4 exceptional projects. Also eco-village design, by-district design. And then 2016, we had these 4 projects. So it's actually quite amazing how once you've done these 4 dimensions, how your mind just opens up and how you can apply yourself to tackle almost any life project, and we guide you through that process. This is why we're trying to throw some seeds out there now, is to start thinking about potential projects. And Ali, you with your students there, you could probably draw them into a case study, not that they will be fully participant with other students that have completed the course, but in a way that they can participate with ideas, and you can share the results of it, so it becomes like a teaching mechanism to engage students. And I'm sure you can explore those type of opportunities.
Thank you very much. And 2 more questions. If you propose a project, do you give a feedback to that project before a decision is made?
Yes, we first of all, we invite proposals, and then we've got a checklist criteria, which we issue out when the proposals are asked for or are solicited. And if there's 20 students, we'll generally try and have 4 students per team. So that gives us 5 case studies, more or less. That's how we work.
Thanks.
I would like to add, Ezio, that if some of you already know that you will be in the design studio and you think you have a project that you want to submit for review, you can do that at any time. But we need to be sure that you're going to be in the design studio before we can actually review it, because otherwise it won't apply.
Yeah, and most students who do the whole JETS course in 1 year, you know, they do the 4 dimensions. So they would have started off with the social, they would have finished now the ecological, the 4th one, the coming up one is economic, and then we finish off with a worldview. And once you've done those 4, then you can enroll in the design studio, which starts in mid-year.
Ezio, I need to leave now. I have another meeting scheduled. So if there are any other questions, I can answer by email for anybody regarding the post-ecological dimension. But otherwise, let's focus on completing. And I'm sorry, I think I gave a little confusing information about the course ending tomorrow. What I meant to say is that we're starting to come to the end of the course starting tomorrow. So there will be a couple of more weeks, but you should consider finishing your assignments as soon as possible. Okay. So thank you, folks. See you next time.
Thanks, Joe. I'm just seeing here if there's any other questions.
One more question, maybe.
Yes.
Okay, Ezio, there is great interest about this education in Turkey. We are at the university. Many students are participating to our workshops. Is it possible we translate these in Turkish and maybe non-Turkish speaking, non-English speaking students join also? So these are very valuable, and can we do it?
Ali, I'm sure we can take you up on it. I think let's you and I formulate an email to Gio and May East, the CEO, and see what we can do to translate this whole Gaia Education JEDS into Turkish. At the moment, it's run in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But maybe we can also stimulate interest for a Turkish version, and maybe you can become one of the trainers and then start leading that process.
Okay, thank you.
So let's take you up on that one. You know, that could also be a case study project. How would you design this with the local environment in Turkey, applying the 4 modules and trying to get it embedded in the universities or creating publicity out of it? So think about a case study that can actually unlock this type of potential and create an advocacy type project that can create awareness for how students should enroll for this course for the greater good. Maybe even as a foundation course for several university courses in engineering or agriculture and so forth.
No, it will be great. Okay, so we write to each other about our ideas, and in the future maybe we develop this program. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other pressing questions about the slideshow for Module 5? I think if there's no more questions, I think maybe we can wrap up the session. I see there's one in the chat. Anyone with a hand up? Oh, Kubra, you've already starting to translate it. So maybe you, myself, and Ali can put something together to start this initiative. Okay, we've got a team effort going here. Yeah.
Certainly have.
All right. No, good stuff. And as Gio was saying, if you're a bit late with your assignments, just write to us. I know I've got a backlog in providing feedback on modules 4 and 5 so far, but just write to us if you're going to be a bit late, and we're very understanding, and because we really want everyone who's made an effort to finish off. In fact, I'll be pestering some of you to say you've only got 1 or 2 assignments left. Just, you know, we're keeping the door open. So just bear with us, and you bear, and similarly, just let us know if you need more time.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. My name's Claire. I'm one of the founder members of Guneshkai. I have previously taken MOOCs from different systems. And with this, I was actually expecting it to be more interactive. And I wonder if this is something that has been specifically chosen to have it this way rather than something more interactive.
We've been following the same design for several years now in the JEDS approach. So the interactiveness is online, where we provide the optional activities, which is the group activity, and then also sharing the individual activity online. And then, you know, that is the interactive nature of it. And then the live sessions as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then obviously when we do the design studio as the 5th dimension, that's a different ball game on its own, because there's a lot of interactions with that, with each design team, the whole group of students, and so forth.
Thank you.
But honestly, if your expectations were not met, just let us know, because we're always open-minded to seeing how more interactive we can make these courses. But I think this is how we've been running them for several years now. But we welcome any insights that you can provide.
Okay, I'll write something.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no more questions, can we stop the recording and sign off then? So I thank you all for being online and participating. It's been quite a really nice experience this year, and seeing the students from a greater cross-section of the planet than usual. And I hope that you all continue with economic and worldview dimensions, and that we see you in the design studio and start thinking about those case studies. And even if you've got something that you want to discuss with me before we get to July, just send the proposal to me as an idea, and we can take it forward from there. So thank you all very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Ezio. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.